A 104-year-old Australian biologist and right to die advocate ends his life in Switzerland. David Goodall said he started thinking about suicide after his quality of life deteriorated over the last year. He traveled to Switzerland, where assisted suicide is legal and becoming more frequent. 9 years ago, there were 297 deaths in Switzerland. By 2015, the most recent year tabulated, the number of deaths more than tripled to 965. Dr. Joseph Capizzi, professor of moral theology and ethics and the executive director of the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, joins us now. So, Dr. Capizzi, this David Goodall, this 104-year-old man, was not terminally ill. He's just old. And his argument, he said that suicide should be a choice for elderly people who are of sound mind. What's the Catholic moral dilemma here?
There are at least a couple of elements to the Catholic perspective on this. One is that we don't really have the choice, when to end our lives for ourselves, right? And typically these choices will be animated by a kind of limited sense of the human being. And in his case, he understood himself to be of no use any longer. And that's a real danger, right? When you think of yourself as, of no use to other people and therefore that you should die, you've got a very limited conception of what the human being is. So that's one aspect of it, a kind of wrong conception of who the human person is. The second of those would be the state. He's not just asking to be allowed to die. He's actually asking to be actively killed by somebody. He's asking for the state to provide him with the means by which he can end his life. That's a real danger, right? We don't want the state to possess that kind of authority, both to judge who is worthy of dying and then also to execute these kinds of things, because it's calling on certain kinds of people to be ready to kill other people.
And when it comes to this issue of assisted suicide, we in the news media are covering this more and more. At least we're seeing more and more cases of this. For example, and I know we're seeing this in certain states, assisted suicide is legal now in 6 states. It's legal in the District of Columbia. But for you as a moral theologian, are you having to deal with this issue more and more and discuss it?
For sure. You're seeing this arise even among students, this sort of notion that freedom entails the freedom even to end one's life or make decisions about the end of life. We should also point out that just last night, in Finland, there was a vote turning down the state's role in suicide. So they voted against euthanasia. So while I think there is this growing trend that, again, sort of finds its root in a debased conception of the human person, on the other hand, there are signs of hope. Some people are rejecting this like the Finns just did.
I want to go back to your earlier point where you were talking about the state's role in this, or how the government sort of views the assisted suicide situation, because obviously, as you were implying, this could be a slippery slope here. So how does a government, for example, claim it can protect its most vulnerable citizens, those people like the poor or have people who have a disability?
Well, governments do this, right? They do, in many ways, look out for the most vulnerable members of their society. But whenever they get into the business of determining quality of life type questions, they're eroding their own capacity to serve the vulnerable, because the vulnerable are often people whose quality of life is not as high as those of other people. If you look at Dr. Goodall and even the reporting on him, he was kind of an upper middle class person. We were all told how he died to ode to joy. I mean, these are sort of upper class, almost elite ways of presenting things. They're not sort of typical to vulnerable people. So you're seeing the march towards death advance on the prongs of a kind of upper middle class or elitist perspective. Governments are going to be eroding their own capacity to look out for the vulnerable if they allow themselves to do these things.
Well, I know it's an issue that Catholics and so many other people of faith around the world are going to be praying about, and obviously an issue that we'll continue to cover. Dr. Joseph Capizzi with the Catholic University of America, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.